In this video, we're going to take it a step further to look at two-step equations and inequalities. When we are working, I want you to still keep in mind your inverse operations. So the inverse operation for addition is subtraction. The inverse operation for division is multiplication, and vice versa. Also keep in mind that you are doing order of operations here, but in reverse order than you would if you were just simplifying an expression. So for the first example, I'm going to put my dotted line through my equal sign. I'm going to highlight the variable that I am trying to isolate, which is the x. In order to get the x by itself, the last thing I want to move is the 2 that is attached to the x. I want to move everything else to the other side first, and then we will deal with the 2. So the first thing I'm going to do is move the 8 to the other side. Since the 8 is being added, the inverse operation would be to subtract 8 to both sides. So 2x equals 4. And now the 2 and the x are attached by multiplication. So when they're attached by multiplication, we want to undo multiplication with division. We'll divide both sides by 2. And our final answer is 2. If you wanted to check the answer, again, you would replace the x with a 2 and be sure that both sides of the equation were equal, and they are. If you need to graph this, you would just put a single 2 on the number line. There's only one answer that makes this equation true, so that's the only value that needs a point for the solution. Moving over, we have an inequality. I still want to isolate the variable y, even though the y is in a different spot than it was in the first example. So I see a positive 7 here. Even though we don't see anything written in front of the 7, we know that it's positive, so I'm going to subtract it to the other side. When you bring the y down, we need to make sure that the negative sign comes with it. Okay, always bring down the sign that's in front of that variable. Even though we don't see a coefficient on the y, we know that the negative sign is telling us that there's a negative 1 in front of the y. Negative 1 is being attached to the y by multiplication, so to undo the multiplication, we are going to divide by negative 1 on both sides. Recall that when you divide or multiply an inequality by a negative, you need to flip the sign. So we would go negative 3, close circle on negative 3, and we want everything that is less than negative 3. Okay, our next example. We want to isolate x. We can see that the x and the 2 are attached by division. So we're going to need multiplication, but that's not where we're starting. We don't want to start with the term that is directly attached to the x. We want to start with the minus 3 to move it to the other side. So I'm going to add 3. Bring down my x over 2. And then remember, this is x divided by 2. So to undo division, we would multiply by 2, or you can also think of it as 2 over 1, which leaves us with just an x on this side and 16 on this side. Again, if you graph the solution, it's only a single point on 16 because that's the only solution to the equation. Okay, the last example is kind of an exception, because we can see that the entire quantity x plus 1 is being blocked by the 4 in the denominator. So we can't start to subtract the 1 until we've taken care of that 4. So I want to note the difference between example up here, where the negative 3 was next to the x over 2, where here the 1 is in the numerator with the x. So we want to get rid of this denominator first. We are dividing by 4, so we're going to multiply by 4. Please, please, please don't try to put this 4 with the x plus 1 here. When you're multiplying by 4 over 1, this 4 and this 4 are dividing out, so you don't need to multiply the 4 to anything else. Just x plus 1 comes down, and we have an 8 on the right-hand side. And then we would subtract 1 and get x is greater than 7. To graph this, we would put an open circle on 7. All the numbers that are bigger than 7 are to the right. If you need any reminders on how to graph inequalities or any reminders on how to solve one-step equations, please go back and watch those videos.